introduce you. Yes, so we are recording the webinar, and as you can see, there is another participant, and there will be some more. If you see anybody trying to enter the room, you can let them in, while I will say just a few words about you. I would like to ask you, when you use this acronym, RELO, that you read it RELO or RELO?
We read it RELO, but
RELO,
actually I have a funny story about that, because before I came to this region, I was in Brazil. And anybody who speaks Portuguese knows that an R in Portuguese sounds like an H. So it's kind of like, hey. And so everyone in Brazil would say it's hello, like hello. And I sort of like that, like hello, relo. But no, in English, we usually say relo.
Okay, very well. Welcome all the newcomers and welcome all those who have been with us for a moment. We have 30 people right now, and we are beginning our webinar. It's almost 8:30. And I would like to say just a few words about Jennifer, who is the regional English language officer. And as we have specified, it's RELO, yes, the acronym. She is based in Tallinn, and that's where she is coming to us from tonight. Correct or wrong?
It's actually not far. I am based in Tallinn, but tonight I'm coming to you from Riga, Latvia.
Oh, see, so that's even more different. And I have the whole checklist of the US embassies and consulates that you worked in. So let me just enumerate a few: Russia, Estonia, Latvia, Lithuania, Belarus, Poland, and Greenland. Last but not least, we might say. You are one of those wonderful volunteers who are willing and ready to spend their time with us teachers, inspiring us with your excellent ideas, your expertise. And you have been supporting the public diplomacy programs that promote quality English language teaching and learning. Prior to joining the US Department of State, you also taught in various US and international settings, being a teacher and teacher educator at the same time, such as English language fellow in Estonia and Fulbright English teaching assistant in Romania, and then Peace Corps volunteer in Slovakia. Really, really impressive. You hold a degree in TESOL and language program administration from the Middlebury Institute of International Studies in Monterey, and your professional interests include teacher training, content-based instruction, and language policy. So that's what we are going to share with us tonight. If there is anything that you would like to add to this brief introduction, because you can never say enough, you are more than welcome to share it with us, because a person like you, knowing so many cultures and flying all over the world, can really teach us a lot. So over to you.
Thank you so much for the kind introduction, and thank you to IATEFL Poland for holding this webinar for teachers. I hope that what you got from my introduction is that I am someone who's very curious. So I think curiosity is something that defines me as a person and as a professional, and also how excited I am to be here talking to you about lifelong learning, knowing that our journeys as teachers, as language learners, and as international citizens never has a beginning and an end. So you've mentioned some seminal parts of my professional history. There are also parts of my personal history that shaped who I am and how I think about the world. And I find that one of the best things about being an English language teacher is that I continue to learn and develop as a professional. I hope that we can make this interactive. I'm really pleased to see so many familiar names joining us this evening. So thank you to those of you who I know in person, who are friends. And for all of you who I don't know yet, I look forward to meeting you sometime in the future, perhaps when I'm visiting Poland again. But it's delightful to speak to you and to share with you some of my confessions about being a language teaching professional. So I will share my screen, just 1 second, and go ahead and get started. I think you can see my screen now. I just want to keep looking at you, so I'll move this over here. So there's nothing better than a well-kept secret. And I hope that you'll react to some of my content today by perhaps putting a comment in the chat box, or if you have questions, I will address them as we go along. So don't feel afraid to be part of this presentation today. It will be a lot better at 8:30 at night or 9:30 at night where I am. I think that we can have a conversation. But I find that there's nothing more enticing than a secret. When people tell you something you don't yet know. And I went on a fantastic city tour almost 20 years ago when I was visiting Romania, and I had this fantastic tour guide who at every corner would say, "Shh, let me tell you a secret, come here," and would show the group some fantastic element of architecture or history that we had never seen before. So that's the intention that I have today, is to tell you some of my own thoughts, some things I know about teaching, some things I've thought about recently in an effort to validate you as English language teachers and also help us re-examine our professional place. As mentioned earlier, my name is Jennifer Uhler, and I am a regional English language officer based at the U.S. Embassy in Tallinn, but I work with teachers in Poland. I love working with the U.S. Embassy in Warsaw and the U.S. Consulate in Krakow, and they have many, many opportunities for teachers of English. So if you don't know about those, I encourage you to reach out, and I will be giving you some information today. I've entitled my presentation Classroom Confessions, and I'll tell you a little bit about where that comes from, but it comes really authentically from my own experience, and I hope you'll find some pieces of truth in what I'm sharing with you today, and maybe even some feelings that we're in this together as we talk about it. So again, I'm going to tell you some of the things that I thought about, and I want to give you some context for how this came about. So I've been out of the classroom for about the last 12 years. So although I work with teachers every day and I think about teachers 7 days a week, 24 hours a day, maybe 360 days a year, because there are a few days that I take off from thinking about teachers. In my role, I plan programming and help support teacher development and teachers associations like IATEFL Poland, but I haven't been a classroom teacher, even though that's my training. That's where I spent the first parts of my career, and it's where my passion lies. And in February of this year, I responded to a request for volunteers, and they were looking for volunteer teachers to work with a group of displaced persons in Tallinn, recent refugees. And they wanted to have an intensive course for these groups that was going to have class 5 nights a week. And they were looking for qualified teaching professionals, not native speakers, not people who spoke English, but people who were actually English teachers. And I responded because I thought, I believe in this cause. I want to help these people. And it would be this, I have skills here. Like, there are lots of things. I don't know how to build bridges. I don't know how to do lots of things. I can't program things. There are lots of things I can't do. One thing I can do, or I think I can do, is teach. And so I responded to this call for volunteers and said, hey, me, I'd like to do it. And as a consequence, I went back to the classroom and I had a co-teacher. We taught English 5 nights a week for 90 minutes a night to adult students who were probably an average of like age 30, mostly women. And I was excited about this. And so this presentation comes out of that experience of being back in the classroom after having a break, of being a teacher educator, but not a teacher, and some things that I started thinking about again. And when I went to the IATEFL conference in Belfast, the global conference this last year in May, or maybe it was earlier than that, it was all I could talk about. Like, oh, the textbook, oh, the teachers, oh, the students, this happened, that happened. And I had a few friends who said to me, Jennifer, like, this is it. This is what you need to talk about. And I said, I have a few confessions to make. And so that's what I'm doing to you, is sharing, or what I'm sharing with you are a few confessions from that experience. One of my favorite quotes in life, I think, is very relevant to this experience. where you stand determines what you see and what you do not see. And this idea of perspective is so profound. I mean, even physically in a room, if you're standing or you're sitting, you see different parts of the room. If you're standing behind the teacher's desk or you're sitting in the student's auditorium, you see something very different. There are elements you can notice. The lighting is different. Maybe you can see the chalkboard or you can't. You can see different people in the room. You have a different focal point. And I think this is true in life. I find this quotation to be one I think about a lot as a traveler. If I think I know something or know somebody, but I change my position, meaning I get to know somebody from that place, I spend time in that place or investigate it, sometimes my thinking about the context or the people completely changes. It's very powerful. So I think that's why it's important not to stand still as a teacher. We have to keep moving so that our perspective stays fresh and it's real and realistic. I also like this idea of windows. So again, with this metaphor of vision, what can you see and what can't you see? And maybe some of you have heard of a window that we can use to talk about professional development. Anybody here heard of something about a window that you can use for professional development? I know you've probably seen this or heard this, but maybe you haven't revisited it in a while. Also very profound to me, along with the quotation I just shared with you. And this is something called the Johari window. It's been around since the late 60s for a while. And the idea is that part of understanding ourselves, becoming more aware as professionals and as people, is bringing things out of the unknown to the known, to examine them and to help us become better practitioners, better people. And so in this Johari window, there are aspects of ourselves that we know, but no one else knows. So they're kind of hidden. It's like I have a lot of things that are hidden about me now for people in this room who've never met me. And in order for you to know those hidden things, I have to show you, like I have curly hair, or I might have to tell you, like I ride a motorcycle. Now you know two things have moved from my hidden self into my more open self. And there are things that are unknown to me, but are known to you. They're part of this blind self that I don't realize about the way I talk, maybe the fact that I look like your Aunt Betty or Algebeta, or I'm not sure what the right Polish name is for that, but the idea is that through reflection, through conversation and interaction, we can bring more things from our hidden and blind selves out into the open. And this helps us re-examine our perceptions about the world, our perceptions about ourselves, and in my perspective, helps us be better teachers and probably better global citizens. So today, I'm going to share some things that came from my blind and hidden self out into the open. I'm going to confess them to you, so they will all be very open, in a way to re-examine my own professional growth. But I come back to this image of a window from Johari very often to think about myself as a practitioner, about people I work with who are emerging practitioners, people that I mentor. I find it to be a very simple and very useful tool. So if you don't know about this, you can read more about it. It's really useful, very easy to use. Sometimes doing a new thing or going back to something you haven't done for a while is very powerful. So I don't know if you've heard this before, but if you sit in a different place, well, first of all, have you ever noticed how adults, if you go to a meeting, you sit in the same chair every time? Or if students come into a classroom, they sit in the same desk as they sit in the first day. It's kind of human nature. I suspect there's something that feels good to us about that pattern. But our brains, they're doing that in some senses because it's easy and convenient, not because it makes us work. And there's been some research, this is from the New York Times, so it's kind of pop science, but that sitting in a different place when you study, or going into a room, again, perspective, right? And sitting in the back instead of the front. It kind of gets our neural juices running, our brains go wild, and it helps us learn better, remember better, and think better. And so this is why it's important to stretch and to do new things. And I think that's why it was important for me to go back to the classroom. It helps us consolidate information and learn. I am a cyclist, and so evidence I have for this. I was sharing at the beginning of this webinar that I lived in Brazil recently, and this was on my commute. I would ride through this park on my bicycle. And most of the time I rode the most convenient, fastest route from beginning to end across the park. But sometimes when I was feeling just a little bit crazy in the morning, I would go the long way, or I would go the opposite way. And I would have the best ideas for programs, for work, for education. I would come to work with my brain on fire. And eventually one of my colleagues said to me, you know, Jennifer, like there are some days when you come to work and it's a little crazy. And I said, you know what? I rode the other way around the park. And as it turns out, there's a pattern to that. So I think in my personal evidence, when I choose to do things that are outside of my pattern, sitting in the wrong seat, going back to the classroom, it provides an opportunity for my brain to recharge and to think about old things in a new way. And it's very, very powerful. All right, so I don't know, maybe you could put in the chat box if you've tried to do anything new. During the pandemic, I tried a lot of new things, and it can kind of like stretch your brain or put you back in the learner's seat for a short time. Maybe you started doing yoga, but you never did it before, or you learned a new hobby like dancing or knitting. Maybe you did a ropes course. I did a ropes course recently, and it really put me out of my comfort zone because I'm not afraid of heights, but as it turns out, I am a little bit risk averse about hurting my body. And it felt like all my energy, my hormones, everything were going crazy. And it felt very good afterwards to reflect on it, but it was scary in the moment. Maybe just learn how to cook something new. If you've had those experiences, feel free to put them in chat box. If not, just think about them. I think when we try new things, we find out we're not very good at it from the very beginning moment, and it causes us to rethink our own patterns. And I think that's very, very healthy. It can help us with that Johari window, and it can even break a cycle of thinking that maybe we've gotten a little bit lazy about. I like this, and referring back to theory a little bit. This is a reflective model of professional education development I really like from Bailey Curtis of Noonan. And it talks about like our professional learning, kind of like when we're training to be teachers. I think this middle stage too, when we're in our professional education development, which I would argue is forever, or we might come back to even, our goal is professional competence, but because our learners change, the field of English language teaching changes, we change. This is the best, most exciting part about being an English teacher or an educator in general, is that we have this possibility to continue growing, and it's endless. But we get stuck. We know the stuff. Like we have some knowledge we've received, some experiential knowledge because we've been teachers, we know about theory and practice. But as we are in the practice of educating, of teaching, and reflecting on it actively, we're in this cycle of rethinking where we are. And it can get a little lazy, it can get a little bit boring in there, but when we have something new that's disruptive, where maybe you go back and you learn another language, or you have an experience learning how to dance and it's painful and it makes you think about being a language learner. Or in my case, you go back to teaching in the classroom and you're like, aha, it's a disruptive moment that we can take advantage of to further our professional education development and become better practitioners. So that's kind of the basis for my talk today. I didn't want to start without a little bit of an entry as well as some theory to ground us with. So I've been a teacher. I was born a teacher, to be honest. And I think my mother and the entire neighborhood of children who were victims to me playing teacher would validate that. But I started my professional journey as a teacher in the late 90s, and I loved being a teacher. This is a picture of me, apparently from 2011. So a while ago. I was a little bit younger, but I really liked being in the classroom. And like many people, I think, who are effective classroom teachers, I ended up being promoted to positions of as an administrator, as a program organizer over time. And I enjoy that. But my heart is really in teaching. And so going back to the classroom for this short program that I described to you was really powerful for me. And it was an exciting opportunity to use my professional skills with an audience I cared about and in a context that was professionally set up. So that's what I'm going to talk about today, going back to the classroom, being a program administrator, a director, a bureaucrat, and going back to the classroom and some of the things that I realized. So I'm going to make my confessions to you if you're ready. My first confession. I had the first day jitters. The day that I was going to start teaching. Oh man, oh man, oh man. I felt like I had never been in a classroom before. I was worried about what the students were going to think of me. The organizers of this program had introduced me to the entire teaching staff as a master teacher and invited people to come observe me from day one. And I just felt a lot of pressure to get it right. And it reminded me, there's this great children's book in the United States called First Day Jitters, in which a teacher is, actually I'm ruining the book because at the end you find out it's a teacher, but there's a character in the book who's like very scared about the first day of school and what's going to happen, who's going to be in the class. And you find out at the end it's a teacher. And I solicited pieces of advice from friends of mine on Facebook and elsewhere, like, oh no, what should I do? And it reminded me that, sorry, let's see. Whew. Teaching, it's not a normal profession. We have these cycles. it's a stressful job, right? Like, there's a lot of pressure to get things right. There are a lot of things to remember. There's a lot of knowledge we have that we're putting into practice, and that this is part of the experience of being an educator, is this kind of like ebb and flow of energy and also of stress and anxiety about teaching. It put me back in touch with that and reminded me that, like, no matter how long you've been teaching, you do have those anxieties, like on the first day, like, am I getting it right? Is this class going to like me? Do I still have the magic that I had last semester? And am I going to remember all the pieces that I need? So I just want to validate you. Teaching is a stressful job, but there's good stress and bad stress about it. But I think it's normal, and I had forgotten about that. One of the resources that I accessed in thinking about my stress was AmericanEnglish.state.gov, which is a free website from the US Department of State. In case you're thinking about next semester, because this semester is almost over, and you want to get things off to a good start, they have a great teacher's corner that has advice on creating a positive classroom, remembering names, starting out strong, setting your expectations with class contracts. I encourage you to check it out. They have a lot of other resources too, but it was really useful to me in thinking about my first day, just getting things set down right and reminding myself of what some of those tools are that we have as teachers. All right, confession number 2. I didn't do my homework. Like you, I have many roles. I'm a wife, I'm a daughter, I'm an employee, I'm a colleague, I'm a teacher, I'm a program administrator, and sometimes I don't have enough hours in the day to prepare adequately for every moment of every activity that I need to be in. And I was teaching this class as a volunteer after work, so it was every day at 6 p.m. after I had been working since 8 in the morning. And often I still had work hanging over me, or was rushing over across town to teach this class. and I didn't have time to adequately read the chapter or make sure I was on the right page or I'd done my homework. And you know, being a native speaker, it's not enough. Being an expert speaker of English, it's not enough. I was teaching a upper intermediate course, and if I had to identify the spot where it all started, it would be conditionals. Unreal conditionals, real conditionals, I don't know conditionals. And I got to class and the book had a diagram and examples, and students, of course, have all kinds of crazy questions. And I hadn't gone back to do my homework. My co-teacher was also a native speaker who was a little bit more likely to say, like, I don't know, or it depends. And my response was much more like, oh, I gotta check this out. I didn't want to be false to my students, but I realized that I wasn't doing them justice in some cases. And, you know, my co-teacher, he would just respond. So we taught in alternating days. It was 5 days a week. And we handed it back and forth. My co-teacher would just tell the students, like, I don't know, it depends. Everything's possible. And it wasn't very helpful because, as you know, because you're teaching professionals, everything is not possible. There's a pattern, there's a reason, there's a selection that people are making using language. And so after a couple of weeks of class in this conditionals unit that we were doing, I was like, oh, Jennifer, hello, go back to your old friends. And of course, I have these sitting in my office. Like, I love grammar books. These grammar books are old friends of mine. They hold all the answers, or many of the answers, or at least can guide me there. And they're based on corpora. And I found it exciting to go back and look at, what do people really use? Why do they use these? Where do they use them? And so, you know, you have to do your homework as a teacher. But my confession is that I didn't always do it, and I got in trouble. Well, I mean, not big trouble, but a little bit of trouble in the classroom. My next confession is related. The textbook was my frenemy. Do you know this expression, frenemy? It's someone who's your friend and your enemy at the same time. Kind of this duality, right? We had a textbook series that I will not tell you what it's called because I don't want anyone to feel bad about a publication. But it was a modern publication that had a textbook, a workbook, and online video compository, interactive worksheets, a teacher's book. There was so much material. And because I was trying to teach with my co-teacher and also be a prepared, good, exemplary teacher, I found myself really stressed out about using the textbook. There was too much that I felt kind of confined by the textbook, like write this quotation on the board, ask these 3 questions. It was too much. I didn't need that. And at the same time, it was too little, because remember I said about doing my homework with the conditionals? We were in a scope and sequence because we were co-teaching, and I felt like I was in a rush to make it through page 55, 56, 57, 58 in one lesson. And this was really stressful for me. It was surprising. I realized I haven't taught from a textbook very regularly as a professional. And most of the times when I was a teacher before, I had a lot of freedom in my curriculum. I knew the rules, and I was the only teacher. I wasn't co-teaching. And I took this to a conference I was at in March, and I was just talking about it. And another speaker from IATEFL Poland actually sat me down and said, has it occurred to you that this book was not made for you? And I needed that. I needed somebody to say to me, it's just material. You are the teacher. And it was funny to me how quickly I lost that perspective because I was nervous about being back in the classroom. I didn't have a lot of time for it. Like many teachers don't, because you're teaching 30 lessons a week and you're running around with 6 textbooks and lots of different student audiences. But when I was released myself from the book, I was a much, much better teacher, because when you have experience, you know what to do with a grammar exercise. You know how to work with a photo or to choose a quote for your students. And that authenticity of being in the moment is much, much more important. All right, another confession. The communicative classroom, I don't know about you, but my programs, my life has been the communicative language teaching is the way, the truth, and the light in English teaching. And that it's my goal to get my students talking and to keep them talking and so on. And I still believe that it's really important to have that kind of output in classrooms and to get people talking to each other. However, I had 17 adults in my classroom, sometimes 18, and the room was very, very small. So there wasn't much space for moving around. And we were in a business building, so making a lot of noise was not really accessible. And my students were often tired adults who would play along, but that didn't necessarily need to move around to do a mingling activity or something like that. And so it made me think about how real those constraints are for large classrooms and how thoughtful we need to be about why we're choosing a communicative activity or moving around a classroom rather than doing it just to kind of mix things up. And I don't think I did it purposelessly, but we should be purposeful and thoughtful because there are some constraints in the adult classroom and also in small spaces. One resource that I went to kind of think about this was a lot about group roles and how I could better structure group work and leave students sitting where they were with partners they want to work with. The YouTube channel for American English at State has a whole bunch of resources on thinking about strategies for managing group work, cooperative classrooms. So if you're curious about this topic, I found this useful and I can recommend it to you on the YouTube channel for American English at State. All right, I have more confessions, don't worry, full of confessions. Another confession. I was teaching adults, do you remember that? The average age was around 30. So critical thinking and media literacy, they need to be explicitly taught. It's not that we don't know these in our first language, but I think what I observed in my classroom, even with upper intermediate students, sometimes it can be disarming to work in a foreign language. You forget that when you search the internet, some of the things that come up, they are not true. And because students are overwhelmed by deciphering information in the foreign language and they don't know the source material, sometimes they forget that they need to be skeptical of the information that they're finding. And I found this to be true in thinking about working with adults and asking them to look at visual literacy. Why this picture? Why here? Why now? What's between the lines? Why do you think the authors of this textbook chose this text? Why is this vocabulary, this grammar, this emotion invoked in this particular text? My students, they loved it, but it wasn't a natural part of our textbook sequence. And it wasn't necessarily something that came out of nowhere. And so I found myself asking these kinds of questions regularly in class to engage my students in interacting with the text that I was bringing to them and the texts that were in our course book. I think sometimes our role as a teacher is really getting people to notice and then leading them. This is all Johari window. We're going back to the window. That there's kind of a possibility in that and kind of pushing people to ask questions that translates to all kinds of places in the real world. And we all should be doing that in the 21st century in everything we encounter. What's happening here? Why? And what message is it sending to me? And who's intending to send it? I really feel very passionate about digital literacy and media literacy. And, Francis Bacon, this is a great quote, but we read for a reason, and there's a discourse around every single piece of information that we take in. And so finding these moments to go, aha, together with our students, because we're co-discovering with them. We don't know more than they do sometimes, but we can help them work with it is really, really powerful. I want to give you a couple of ideas maybe of how you might think about digital literacy, visual literacy, and media literacy. This course, the dates I have here are finished, but it's going to be repeated in 2023. There's a great course from the US Department of State through their online professional English network called English for Media Literacy for Educators. This course blew my mind. It was created by George Mason University, and it's all about asking those questions in regular moments in our class. I mean, even with like the textbook, like why? Why this variety of English? Why this picture of these kinds of people? And I have a special opportunity I want to share with you that's specifically for Polish English teachers and also teachers from Estonia, Latvia, and Lithuania. In 2023, the US Embassy in Warsaw, the US Consulate in Krakow, and the US Embassies in Vilnius, Riga, and Tallinn are going to offer a special course, and it'll be a media literacy course with an English language specialist, synchronous and asynchronous work. We had 38 graduates from the course we did this fall, so popular that we're going to repeat it for up to 50 teachers. The course itself will start in February and March. It's 7 weeks long and involves an online course as well as coaching from the specialist who will help you think about like, how can you put this in your classroom and what is working for you or not working for you. It's specifically for primary and secondary school teachers from the countries that I've already mentioned, Poland, Lithuania, Latvia, and Estonia. And we're going to hold an in-person seminar in Warsaw in 2023. So if you apply for the course, you successfully complete the online course, you'll be eligible to come meet with me, our specialist, Marie Van Roberg, and some other amazing specialists in the area of media literacy next summer. Want to know how to sign up? We will be advertising on Facebook through IATEFL Poland and everywhere in January. But if you want to make sure you don't miss it, you can send an email to ambassadausa@state.gov, and they'll make sure that you get the program announcement. So I encourage you to be involved. It's like fantastic, and it will help you think about how you can integrate these kinds of questions into your teaching. All right, is anybody here taking the course? I see that we have a couple people who are excited about it in the chat, but if you've taken it, I would love to. All right, so my next confession is, if I'm honest with you, I'm a theory geek, but I like practice more than theory. And I also really need other teachers. So when I was teaching this course, I just wanted to talk to other teachers. Like, do you know what happened? Guess what? Guess what happened with my students? Guess what about this textbook? How do I do this better? And I went to a couple conferences during that time, and I realized like I like listening to something brainy, but actually I really just want things I can use in my classroom tomorrow, like some really concrete help for tomorrow. You can use this activity. Here's this trick. Here's a joke. Here's an exercise for making groups. And I realized like like conferencing at IATEFL, talking to other teachers, webinars like this one, ready to use flexible activities were exactly what I wanted as a teacher when I was in the classroom. And there's some great opportunities you have in Poland specifically to connect with the IATEFL Poland community. But one other resource through americanenglish.state.gov, the, again, like free website from the US Department of State, they have a couple of resources which are new, including this one, Critical Creativity in Action. There's a teacher's book, but there are these cards you can cut apart or use digitally for group work, things like that. And it was exactly what I needed. I could like download it, print it, cut it apart, take it to class, and be ready. And so I've had a lot of theory, but I was hungry for kind of like practical ideas to mix up my classroom. So I would encourage you to look at americanenglish.state.gov or to connect with the IATEFL Poland community if you're looking for other ways to refresh your teaching. Another resource, American English Live, fantastic webinar series. The entire series is available on YouTube, but we'll be starting a new series in January for teachers. They happen on Wednesdays every other week for 6 weeks. You can earn a certificate. And yeah, this one was on like using songs, and I found some new songs I could use. I like using songs in my classroom. They were ready to use. I could download them after watching the webinar. So another resource there is the American English Live webinars. And if you want to find out more about those, you can look at americanenglish.state.gov. All right, let's see. So I don't know why there's a mark on my slide. That's a mystery to me. But my next confession is assessment is tough stuff. I don't know about you, but my teacher preparation program didn't leave me adequately prepared to talk about proficiency. I mean, I had a lot of good input, but it definitely was not the end of my professional development. And I had students who were at the upper intermediate level who really wanted to know, am I better? Did my English get better? I've been studying for 2 weeks every night. Do I sound better? I don't know. Especially at that level, right? It's so hard to discern progress. And I was looking for resources to help my students feel better. I think the can-do statements from the Common European Framework are really great. I don't know why there are marks in my slides. They're on every slide, so I must have done something. Let me
just
fix
erase stop annotation. It will erase it. Or
okay, thank you. I don't even know how I started the annotation, but let me fix it. I can stop my share. Thank you. Because I don't want it to look ugly for you. 1 second. I'm glad you're still with me. All right, I fixed it. So let me reshare my slide.
Don't worry about that. Your lecture is amazing.
Oh, well, thank you. I'm glad you think so. So I fixed the slide. I hope that's amazing too. It's another confession. But assessment's really hard. It's really, really hard. And so, you know, I think I just want to validate all of you. This is not easy, and it's hard to feel. It's not. It's art and it's science. We can capture performance, but what people know in their brains is it's hard to capture. You can capture a performance on a certain day, but there's so many aspects to language use that I think it's hard. And also we have these mixed ability classrooms. They're a fact of life. You can have a B1 class. I mean, what a false assumption that everybody's in this huge band of the Common European Framework and is somehow going to have common features of their language skills. Each individual learner is going to be in a different place, and they're going to have a different pace of learning, a different style of doing so. And that's just part of what being a teacher is, right? It's really messy. It means that teachers have to think about group work, how to manage a classroom. You've got one student who's like, oh, I know this, I know all the answers. And you've got others who are struggling with some of the vocabulary that are part of the exercise. I found a good tool was to use self-assessment, have my students reflecting on their Johari windows and where they were progressing, where they could identify their own strengths. They really wanted teacher feedback. So my feedback was meaningful to them, and I wanted to make sure they got it in ways that made sense to them. On the other hand, I am just one human, just like you are only one human. And so there are some limits, and we have to share that contract with our students for learning, that it's a 50-50 contract. It's not one where the teacher can empty the contents of learning into the student, even if they try really hard. I think one thing I thought a lot about when I was teaching this class is how language is not linear. We want it to be linear. I'm a ballroom dancer as a hobby. I want that to be linear. I want to learn all the parts of the waltz before I learn the foxtrot. And I want to learn all the foxtrot before I learn the cha-cha. That is never how classes are taught. When you're a dancer, you move from the Viennese waltz to the foxtrot, back to the quick step, and then to the cha-cha, and it can feel very frustrating as a learner. You are making progress, but you can't always feel it because lots of these things are repeated and they reappear in different places. The techniques and the pieces that you learn can be applied in different ways. And for me, that's a powerful metaphor for learning a language. As in, we've got to do lots of different things, practice different skills and different modalities. And we need to tell our students that that is normal, that they're going to keep repeating the same things in different ways and notice and pick things up, and that it's like coming to class is not enough. So it's not just your butt in a chair, but it's your active mindset and picking things up inside and out of class. And so as a teacher, one of the confessions I have here is like, I need to better explain what I know about how languages are learned, because our students don't know. The general public does not know. And we have that expertise that we really should be sharing, whether we do that in L1 or L2, so that our learners understand that like they're normal and they're making progress, but there may be pieces they can't see. And there are other pieces that we can see and help them see for themselves. All right. I think I have another confession. Oh, I actually was just going to point you to a resource. So again, on the American English website, you can search for assessment. There are a lot of great tools there. I went back there to think about self-assessment, peer assessment, those kinds of things. I encourage you to check out that resource, English Teaching Forums there. There's a lot of resources that are free and you can just download them yourself. So yeah. All right. Confession. My confession's about technology. I like technology. I know how to use it more or less. But this course book, remember the course book? It had like videos and audio and interactive exercises and things we could do with the smartboard. And I wanted to use it all because I wanted to try it out and be experimental. Not necessary, not necessary. I used it in the wrong places and it's overwhelming. A classroom in 2022, there's a lot of stuff and it's a distraction. That's my confession to you. Good teaching is being in a place with your students and enjoying your time together. And so I think sometimes you have to start where they are. Simpler can definitely be better. I don't know who's drawing on my screen. If you would stop drawing on my screen, that would be awesome. Let me see. I don't think I have the annotation on, but I'm going to reshare. Good. There's great resources again from the American English website. So on YouTube, you can find like a whole series on how to utilize technology. But one thing I realized is kind of less is more. And if I want to use technology, I want to be really intentional about it and maybe leverage that technology out of class more than inside the classroom. I think we can get carried away because we want to be modern, even on Zoom. And sometimes we just need to be in the same place with our students. All right, I have a lot of confessions. Being a co-teacher is hard. If you've ever taught in tandem with another teacher, like making sure you're communicating well about your students and about how to work together can be really difficult. Sometimes I didn't communicate well and that didn't help our class move forward, especially when we had the scope and sequence. Another confession, I already talked about this a little bit, but I need to teach learners how to learn. So I think we assume that people have notebooks, they have pencils, they have textbooks and other things, but they may not have very good strategies for learning, for memorizing, for repeating things, and they go back to these habits that may not have been very healthy in the first place. I attempted to use some Portuguese, to use some Polish. It's late at night here. to use some Polish here. I don't know if you have a saying like this, but repetition is the mother of all learning. It's not. This is like the most false phrase I've ever, but we believe it. We're like, okay, if I just write these words 100 times, if I just say this again and again and again, I'm going to learn it. It's not what we know from the science, and we need to help our students understand that maybe just repeating again and again is not the best strategy for them to learn a language. Our students have cognitive overload. I love this, like Far Side cartoon, like my brain is full. We need to help our students understand how memory works and how language learning works. And so some things that I shared with my students in this class I was teaching were kind of to tell them, like, look, rereading over and over and over again, it's not a productive strategy for you to remember. Instead, what about if you make some things more memorable? You use different modalities. What if you don't use your phone and instead you like struggle with remembering and recalling that information, rewiring those neurons and like dredging up the word, the vocabulary, even if we get it wrong, is very powerful for our brain. And taking time to go ahead and rethink it, rewire our past is really, really important. You know, there are some different kinds of practice that we know can be really great. These are just some ideas from reading that I've done and from some practices I know that are theory-based. Spacing our practice, forcing retrieval, interleavening, which is kind of like dancing the cha-cha and going to the waltz and back to the foxtrot in the language sense, right? Like doing some reading and then some writing as different kinds of practice is really important. And we have to switch before we're completely finished, because, you know, finishing completely is not possible. And you know what? We got to sleep. Like, you can't learn it in a day. So we've got to give our students a rest as well, and to give them permission to rest, because that's when our brains work. I'm getting some great comments in the chat box. So thank you to everybody who's kind of like providing conversation with me. I really appreciate it and am enjoying the conversation there. We're all only human. You're right. Okay, another confession. Sometimes I focus on the exercise, like, we're going to do this conditional. I did my homework. I read the grammar book. I'm ready. And I forgot the learner. And I think this can happen too. We geek out on the grammar. We get excited about an exercise we're doing, and there are people in our classroom. And sometimes those people are the most important part. When I think about some of the most important educators in my life, I don't remember the exercises they taught. I remember the subjects they taught. I remember some lessons I learned from them, but I mainly remember their humanity. And so I think, like, remembering Leo Van Leer was one of my favorite professors when I was in graduate school, and he talks a lot about the ecology or environment for teaching, and starting with the learner. And so I think, like, that always needs to be our starting point, are the people in front of us, not the technology, not the exercise or the grammar, but what's happening in people's lives and what might be facilitating or inhibiting what is happening in the classroom in that particular day. And, you know, I think providing choices and understanding the full person that are our students is really important. So here's a picture of me. I told you earlier I rode a motorcycle, right? And here's me on my motorcycle. But you'd have to talk to me to know that. You'd have to know a little bit more about me than just that I'm a language learner or a language teacher, that I'm a person. And I think when we can tap into those passions of our students or their background, or understand them in a personal way, it goes a long way. I know many of you do that, but it's worth remembering, and I think we can forget sometimes. All right, another confession. Language teaching, funny place. Like, things happen that you never think could happen, right, in class. And there's a lot of risk taking that happens, but there's also just a lot of joy. And so I think we have to remember that, like, we have the privilege of being in the classroom, and we can find a lot of moments. Not all professions have this much fun or joy going on in them. So there's a lot of humor. My students and I, we laugh together a lot. A laugh like deep from the belly, even when my students I know were going through some really difficult times. And so, it's good for us, actually. Like, it's important. Remember, I said sleep is important. Laughter is important to learning. And so we need to remember to create opportunities to do that. And, my final confession is I'm still learning. I find a lot of power in that. And, this like newness in my practice and reflection. I'm so grateful that I get to try new things. I'm so grateful that sometimes I fail. And going back to the classroom, after a long time, I was out of the classroom for about 10 years as a regular teacher, was really insightful. And so I encourage you to do things that are uncomfortable or new, inside or outside of the classroom, because I think they're very, very powerful. They help us re-examine our Johari window to find joy in what we're doing. And I think ultimately make us better people and better humans, which we all aspire to be. I guess to kind of conclude my presentation today, I have some advice for the teaching and the learning journey. Keep going back. Go back to the window, like look through it. Be a beginner at something. It will teach you more about being an educator than you can even imagine. Take a risk. When something is uncomfortable, revel in it. Like, find some space to learn. When you're uncomfortable, it means you're learning. I'm uncomfortable all the time, so I suspect that means that I'm a lifelong learner. Find people to talk to, reflect, journal, take an online course, find a resource, be a resource. There are lots of educators who aren't as experienced as some of you. I know that they would love to be validated by your confessions about teaching, and also to have a mentor in the field. Teaching can be a very lonely place. And my last piece of advice is, maybe every once in a while, you should invite your program director, your administrator, or a manager to come back and teach, not to observe you teaching, but to come into your classroom. I think when you can do it in a non-threatening way, it's really, really insightful for everybody. And I'm grateful that I had this opportunity to teach again. I want to remind everybody that the U.S. Department of State, the U.S. Embassies and the U.S. Embassy in Warsaw and the U.S. Consulate in Krakow have lots of free resources for teachers. They have online courses for which they have scholarships. The AmericanEnglish.state.gov website has English Teaching Forum that you can read for free. Comes out 4 times a year. It's a fantastic resource. And for those of you I can see who are not from Poland, you have regional English language officers too. There are 26 offices worldwide. You can find out where your office is. For example, if you're from Cairo or from Yemen or from other, I'm not your relo, but you do have a relo, and you can find out who they are on AmericanEnglish.state.gov. And finally, I'll just finish with a stanza from my favorite poem from Theodore Roethke, an American poet, who says, "This shaking keeps me steady. I should know what falls away is always and is near. I wake to sleep and take my waking slow. I learn by going where I have to go." I think indeed we should keep shaking, keep putting new things into our practice, and learn better about teaching as we teach. There's a QR code here if you would like to learn more about resources from the Regional English Language Office. But I really enjoyed interacting with you today. I hope you found some validation and some truths in the things that I've shared. And I thank IATEFL Poland for hosting me tonight. I have time for questions if you have any, but I know you're busy people, and I thank you for spending an hour of your evening with me.
There are many messages for you in the chat box. Messages like amazing webinar and so on. So I will save the chat box and I will send it to you after the webinar so that you have it in your files. You know, I have such files myself. I call them positive energy files. When I get some positive messages, either from my colleagues or from my students who are happy in some kind of situations, then I put them in positive energy file. And then when I'm depressed, I open up such a file and that brings me up to the surface. I don't drown.
I love that idea of a positive energy file. I should definitely keep one. And I can share the resources. You can find them all at americanenglish.state.gov. And I will share a copy of my slides in case you want to post them together with the webinar or other things so people have access to them.
Okay, all right. So I will remember about it. And I would like to inform everybody that Jennifer has also promised to think about having another webinar with us later on in this year. So stay posted, keep an eye on the webinars plan. You've had more than 60 participants, so that's been a huge webinar room. So congratulations. And I feel inspired by you as well.
Oh,
So
thanks for hosting me and for coming.
ready to continue teaching, being enlightened by your ideas, really.
No, thank you
Okay.
very much.
Do we have anybody else who would like to say something at the end, something positive? Let's have positive energy flow. Anyone? So maybe if you don't want to talk, so let's continue with the hearts. Yes.
It was amazing. Had a wonderful time. Okay. It was really, really inspiring. And everything you said is crucial for us to have a good, you know, it's important to think about all these things that you just said. I mean, we have to be, how can I say this, with ourselves, you know, and listen to our confessions, you know, to the things that it's the way you did it. Thank you so much. It was amazing.
Oh, thank you for coming. It was a pleasure to have you, Fernando.
And see you soon, maybe in Jennifer's other webinar or some other people's webinars. Thank you very much. So now I am going to stop recording the webinar. Okay.